St Vincent is an example of a person who in his own person combines many vocations. There was a double pull. He was ordained very early in life, beneath the canonical age. He was only 20. It seems that he was falsely accused of something he never did and spent a while in some kind of captivity or prison. It would have been an experience which would explain his attitude to those who are actually the outcasts. And he was ahead of his time. He had a kindness in his face which is still expressed in all the icons and statues that we have of him, for we knew pretty well what he looked like from the way that he was painted at the time. He also had a very close collaborator, and we see in this the way in which Providence puts people together to do something for him. It happened in the life of another person who was living around the same period, St François de Sales, Francis of Sales, and in his case it was quite dramatic, for St Jean-Françoise de Chantal one day was in church, and she saw this person appearing in the pulpit, and something went down her spine, and she felt this, c'est lui, it's him. She knew that this was the one who was going to make things happen for her and with her. And it was, in their case, the foundation of the Visitation Nuns. What is less known is that this great bishop, Bishop of Geneva, had an intuition which he was not able to realize. He wanted that there should be nuns who would be able to break the mold and go into the houses and help precisely those who needed it, the miserable. But it wasn't possible. The structure was still so strong that he had to opt for the classical one of enclosure, which explains the situation of the Visitation Nuns to this day. With regard to this other one, contemporary more or less, the spark of the Spirit can be seen insofar as a divine intuition was given to him and to the one that he was working with, St. Louise Marillac, to make a structure which could crack the mold. And the ingenious solution that was found was this: to have, for the first time, not perpetual vows and solemn vows, but vows which had to be renewed every year, which is still the structure of the Daughters of Charity, which gave them the possibility to do what St. François de Sales could not do. They were able then to minister to these outcasts, and they became a great congregation with holy souls involved, the likes of which gave us the miraculous medal. She was only in formation, a young lassie, when St. Catherine Labouré was called by her guardian angel to the chapel at midnight, and where she met the Blessed Virgin sitting in the chair in the sanctuary area, which is still there, and she was able to place her hands on her knees. And from there came this medal, which has gone around the world like wildfire. I expect most of us have it on, actually, in this room. So, this was interesting. I would like to make a little aside before going into the other side of this saint's life. It's the way in which the Lord is free to act when there's a holy bonding between souls. It happened with St. Vincent, as we've seen. It also happened in the family of the Visitation Nuns. The influence already between the founder, the bishop, and the co-founder, this saint, who was a widow. and also in the progeny, because we have a wonderful example down the line, about a century later, less actually, when the Sacred Heart zooms in to Paray-le-Monial and gives the world what we now know as the devotion which goes under that name. And there we have a curious situation where this helpless nun, completely hidden from the eyes of the world, was, by an act of providence, enabled to do something which impacted on the whole cosmos. Rather as, in an earlier age, Blessed Julien de Montcornillon was able to, more or less, move the whole church through a link. This was a nun who was given an experience more than once, which she didn't understand, seeing the moon with a black cross, or not, more or less a stroke across it, a bar. And it was given to her to understand that it was something missing in the church's calendar. It was a feast in honor of the Blessed Sacrament. Again, a helpless nun who couldn't do a thing if it weren't for the fact that by some accident, in inverted commas, a future pope was close to her, and to Eve, who helped her, another Beata. And so when this pope was able to operate, it became the beginning of Corpus Christi as we have it. So too with the Sacred Heart, it was because of a man who was close to a soul that it went round the world. And the nun in question, Margaret Mary, was also given a strange vision. It was at one occasion that she saw the Sacred Heart, but she also saw two smaller hearts, one on one side and one on the other beneath it. And she understood that it was her own heart and that of the one who was counseling her spiritually, who by now also is a saint, Saint Claude de la Colombière. Now, in his case, he had the machinery of the largest order in the world, for he was a Jesuit, which explains how the Jesuits were the ones who took this on board and became a balm. We still have now in Ireland the Messenger of the Sacred Heart, published by the Jesuits. When a student in Rome, on a first Friday, I would like to drift towards one of their main churches in Rome and celebrate Holy Mass on the altar which stands before the original painting of the Sacred Heart, the very one that went round the world and which you know. That's there, in the heart of Rome, looking at love as one celebrates love. Now this was therefore a holy bonding of two souls which became very, very powerful. The same thing happened in the case of St Vincent and St Louise de Marillac. They were able to bring to being this new congregation, and with regard to the way in which this is seen as an expression of the life of the Trinity is to be looked at. For these nuns, being mobile and available, got to places and situations where no priest could do. It was the case, and still is the case, when they're flourishing throughout the Catholic world. War situations and the like. Indeed, we had them in our parish, and they were very, very caring. There was the case of one in particular. I remember when there was a casualty, because there were 6 or 7 priests in our parish, Benedictines. One was in trouble and disappeared, and who went to look all over the place until she found him, but one of these hidden nuns, Daughters of Charity, and talked to him, and then went to talk to his superior, by then bishop, actually Cardinal Basil Hume, Abbot of Ampleforth, and he, as a good pastor of soul, insisted, get him to come and see me. He cared. Now this was true charity on a level of soul to soul, which is not anything which can be replaced by a meeting. soul-to-soul ministry is the essence of our pastoral life. So, this then was what led to the Daughters of Charity as we know it. We have then, from his spirituality, the whole machinery of what we now have all over Ireland and the world, the conferences of St Vincent de Paul, where they bring in actually material help to those who are in need, as well as spiritual help. Now, the spiritual help is seen in the other side of this great saint, that of the other very important foundation that came from him. It was the Fathers of the Mission, commonly called the Lazarists because of the area of Saint-Lazare where they were working. And they went all over the world, precisely well-formed and anchored in prayer. I just want to zoom into one area. It's the question of the way that these saints had an influence by the combination of their word and their heart. He was known to be the great lover of souls, and therefore his word had an impact because it was warm. They say, do they not, as cold as charity. A person will feel the difference. Here we see him always presented with children around him, even in his arms. The children flock to him. And it is natural that it should be the case, because a child will somehow intuit a natural warmth and goodness. There should be a natural bonding between a nun or a priest and a child. Why? Because they're serving the same Lord, and the child has come straight from that experience, heaven, in the sense that it's been ignited directly in the bosom of the Blessed Trinity. Its soul is pure and uncontaminated, freshly sparked, and the child somehow knows it. He knows God by instinct, and therefore will drift towards anything which somehow speaks of it. And it's a tragedy now if priests have not easy access to children, because just by being warm and in a way present to them as God on earth, they are able to be hugely influential in forming them. I return to what I mentioned with regard to this holy, simple nun in our parish, amongst others, Sister Enda. She cared. Indeed, one day she discreetly but powerfully whispered something to me, which obviously wasn't just human. When she heard where I was going, she said, "You haven't thought of becoming a monk in a monastery where you can teach." She was obviously thinking of Ampleforth, but it's only a person who cares on a personal level who would have the time to come about and say that. People who care for souls. Nothing can replace a nun. Now, if it's not happening, if the education of our young people, if even the nursing of our sick people is now massively in the hands of a great machine called the state, then we're not surprised if the fruits are what they are. Anyone who handles a person who's suffering has to do it with that love of the Blessed Trinity which these saints have. It concerns, I would say, quite a few people here. Any time you have a soul that is suffering, handle with gloves on. Ask the Spirit for the right word, and let all that you do be an expression of that warmth. Going back to where I started, a Sacred Heart, warmth, a flame. Because our life is not polarized, it's not compartmentalized, it's a bomb. We are an expression of the Trinitarian explosion of our being, and we have to be all love. Our words are useless if they do not come from love. The old saying still holds true. Your actions speak so loudly that I can't hear what your words are saying.